Over here. Thank you. Chris, on the heels of that, this all feels a little bit small ball, so we'll ramp up. But as someone who has been Green or third party since 1996, I've watched the Democratic Party march steadily right my entire life. While I admire the attempt to change the Democratic Party, presumably from within, I feel this effort traps progressives and actually prevents change. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I fully agree. You know, I was Nader's speechwriter. And Ralph, I think, understood. Nobody understands corporate power better in America than Ralph Nader. None. And nobody has fought it with more integrity. And let's get over the Democratic lie that he elected George W. Bush, because it's not true. Ralph understood because he saw that process. He was up close. I mean, as Ralph said, our last liberal president was Richard Nixon. Not because he was a liberal or had a conscience, but because he was frightened of movements. So he passes, I think, 24 pieces of amazing legislation. He creates OSHA, the Mine and Safety Act, the Clean Water, all of which were written by Nader, and then funneled in through what the existent liberal wing of the Democratic Party. Black lung, that came under Nixon. And we lost those movements. I mean, people say, you know, elections, you know, as Emma Goldman, if elections were that effective, they'd be illegal. Even if Sanders had won, he would have been paralyzed in Washington. We have to rebuild those movements. The job is to pit power against power. And I've told it before, but there's a moment in Kissinger's memoirs, although you were all banned from buying the book, where it's 1971 and Nixon has taken empty city buses around the White House. There are tens of thousands of anti-war demonstrators, and Nixon is looking out the window going, Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us. And that's where we want people in power to be. It's our job to put them there. And of course, they're destroying the remnants of unions as fast as they can with the new right-to-work laws. And you can be sure now, the Supreme Court. I mean, the whole perverted idea that individual choice or gender identity or something, it's all conflated with freedom. And that kind of hyper-individualism, and of course I support everybody to actualize themselves as who they were meant to be, but that is essentially what we are given in place of freedom. The only way we're going to protect ourselves is to rebuild the communal structures, the social bonds that allow us to resist. And part of, you know, what's so depressing is the press. I mean, CNN is just endless burlesque. Watch it. It's patterned. Zucker patterns it. He's admitted this quite consciously on ESPN. It's just endless chatter, speculation, who's in, who's out. They're all courtiers. It's all reality television. They just finished the Kavanaugh reality television series as if there was any doubt about the outcome. And then we had the Stormy Daniels television series and the Omarosa television series. But it's not news. It's not journalism. It makes them a lot of money. I mean, they are complicit in creating Trump. And they love Trump. Trump's a moneymaker for them. So we've got to rebuild those movements. And they have done a pretty good job of decimating the mechanisms by which we once protected ourselves from their predatory nature. And I think part of that is third parties. So Ralph said, look, we won't win, but if we can get 5, 10, 15 million votes, we can begin to create pressure and hopefully get the Democratic Party to respond. And the Democratic Party did respond. After 2000, Nader scared the hell out of them. And they responded by demonizing him, and the corporate media went along with it. They challenged his voting list, running up millions of dollars in, I mean, his voting lists were impeccable, but they just wanted to run up his legal bills. So Patti Smith and I were running around raising money for Ralph. So yeah, we've got to, you know, we've got to begin to hold fast to what we believe. People say, well, how, you know, I mean, for me, it's personal. I mean, I worked in Gaza. I'm not going to betray the Palestinians. I mean, if Barack Obama gets up and gives a speech written by AIPAC, I'm not betraying these people. Everybody else betrays them. I'm not betraying them. My students, half of my students wouldn't even be in prison but for Bill Clinton. You know, half of the people in our prison system are not charged with ever physically harming another person. It's social control, and corporations are going in there making a killing. Global Tel-Link, Aramart, you know, every service, it's $1 billion, and their lobbyists are all down there making sure those recidivism rates of 76% within 5 years remain just where they are. Go ahead.
Actually.
Oh.
No problem. So then, to follow on, does it matter who runs for president in 2020? And if so, who should run for president in 2020?
I just don't waste a lot of time. I mean, I voted for Sanders in the primary. I voted for Joe Stein in the general election. I mean, you know, I gave a talk in once when Nader was running in Dearborn, which has the largest concentration of Arab Americans, and I kind of gave it to them because they have resources, highly educated on, and I said, you know, you've got arguably the most important, because you know Ralph is of Lebanese descent, he speaks fluent Arabic. I said, you have the most important Arab American in the, you know, the modern period, and I said, you know, you've got, he's saying everything right about Israel, about Palestine, and you got to stand behind him. And I said, you know, if I was speaking to a Jewish group and Israel, it was reversed, they wouldn't walk out. We have to, if we don't begin to hold fast to those moral imperatives, they're going to continue to do what they've always done, which is steamroll us. You know, I just don't know how much more evidence anybody wants that the system doesn't work. I'm just kind of mind-boggled. And the Democratic Party has been completely complicit in all of this, and their stubborn refusal to address the social inequality that is destroying the country. And they don't want to address it, number one, because they're complicit, and number two, because if there was real reform, they'd be out of a job. That's right. Well, no, they'd be hired as lobbyists, but this is where most of them end up anyway.
Switching over to a couple of questions about the media. Your show On Contact is on RT America. That network is seen as a tool by some used by the Russian government to send misinformation to the American people. How do you respond?
Well, don't watch it. I mean, you want to know why they want to shut down RT America or shows like mine? Read the Director of National Intelligence report. There's 7 pages on RT. There's not a word about Russian propaganda. They're quite transparent. They interview anti-fracking activists. They interview Black Lives Matter activists. If we had a functioning public broadcasting system, I wouldn't be on RT. Look, I mean, they'll shut me down eventually, but I'm not going to cave. And I worked Eastern Europe. The only place you could hear Václav Havel was on Voice of America. Didn't mean Havel supported the Vietnam War or American imperial. He was a socialist. But I'll take whatever platform I can get. I used to be at the epicenter of the American media empire. I used to write stories, and the next day the State Department held briefings about it. And I've self-exiled myself because I won't play the game. You know, I left the New York Times over, I was publicly denouncing the call to invade Iraq, and I was booed off of a commencement stage in Rockford, Illinois. At one point, most of the 1,000 people got up and started singing God Bless America to drown me out. They cut my microphone twice. They had 2 men in their gowns come up and try and push me off the podium. That was my first and last commencement invitation. And so the Times gave me a written reprimand. Now, I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. I spent 7 years in the Middle East, and I speak Arabic. And they said, you're not allowed to speak about Iraq. And because I was, in their words, impugning the impartiality of the New York Times. And I quit. I left the paper. I will go wherever I can speak, you know, what I have to speak. And I'm certainly well aware that the Russian government, which certainly I don't have proof because it's technically a private company, but it's probably Russian money. I know why they're doing what they're doing in the same way that I knew why Voice of America was giving voice to all sorts of Eastern European dissidents. I was also working for a newspaper, the New York Times, that had blacklisted Noam Chomsky. They wouldn't even print his name in the paper, the intellectual I admire most in America. So you have to carve out whatever platform you can get and speak with the integrity, as much integrity as you can, and realize, as Paul Tillich once wrote, that all institutions, including the church, are inherently demonic, and one day you're going to run head on into that institution and have to walk away. That's kind of been my career. So, I mean, that's why I'm there, because I can't go anywhere else, and because they will allow critics of imperialism and capitalism to have a voice, whereas our public broadcasting system, especially PBS, are wholly owned subsidiaries of the Koch brothers. You know they fund the NewsHour, right, on PBS? Yeah. I was up at the public radio station in Boston. David Koch sits on the board. That's why it's so boring. You go back to the late 1970s, you could watch Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn. They were on public television. Because the role of a public broadcasting system is to give space and a platform to people who aren't owned. But we don't have one anymore, and NPR is awful. Okay. And
I've got just a few more questions. Trevor Noah has said that Trump has weaponized victimhood. You have comments? Any comments on that?
I don't think Trump's smart enough. Trump, all of this preceded Trump. I mean, I was in Montgomery, Alabama with Brian Stevenson, the great civil rights attorney. We were walking through the streets of Montgomery. Half of Montgomery's black. And Brian's pointing out these Confederate memorials everywhere. And then Brian says, you know, most of these were put up in the last 10 years. And that's what I saw in Yugoslavia. With the economic meltdown of Yugoslavia, the dispossession of the working class, they retreated into mythical identities because you lose work, you lose your capacity to have a voice within the society, then you retreat into a mythologized version of you and where you came from. And that feeds the sense of victimhood. You blame the other. I mean, the whole idea that 11 or 12 million undocumented workers are responsible for the economic decline of the United States. It's about as rational as the idea that 800,000 Jews, which were about 1% of Germany, were responsible for the collapse of. It doesn't make any sense rationally. But it's effective, and the elites always scapegoat, always demonize. And what I worry about, especially with the Trump administration, is that if we get, or when we get, to an economic crisis, just any sense of constraint will be lifted. So Trump is a classic demagogue. Remember that, you know, and you can read Evans or Kershaw, the great writers on Nazism. In 1928, the Nazis were considered buffoons. I mean, Hitler couldn't even speak proper German. I mean, they were just these weird characters. So 1929 comes, you have the economic crash, and then the control of the German government is in the hands of Ebert and the Social Democrats, the liberals. What does Ebert do? He caters to the international banking system. He imposes draconian forms of austerity, including abolishing unemployment insurance. And Kershaw, Evans, they all say, if without the economic collapse of Weimar, the Nazi Party would have never achieved power. That was true in Yugoslavia. Because the anger at the system, especially if you get hyperinflation, the anger at the system becomes so pronounced that they will turn to people even though they realize these people are buffoonish. And you see that. That doesn't mean they're not very, very dangerous, as we see with Trump. But no, I think Trump is he's a con artist who was astute enough to realize what people wanted to hear, 35% tariffs, I'll bring your jobs back, all this kind of stuff. But he didn't weaponize. I mean, he all of this groundwork was laid long before Trump. Trump is the product. He rises up out of this. Demagogues rise up out of this kind of disintegration.
I've just got time for a couple more. In view of the shell, you spoke a little bit ago about acting with integrity, and in view of the shell games that corporations play, do you have any advice on investing with integrity? I just thought I would pose it.
Investing with integrity.
Investing with integrity. Thinking about money. Integrity.
I went to divinity school, not business school. I really think that that's kind of, how do I put it? Yeah, it's an oxymoron, and it's a classic way that capitalists engage in what we call moral fragmentation, to quote Svetlana Todorov, where most of your lifestyle is geared towards building a pathetic little monument to yourself, and so you do things like ethical investing, or you drop a bag of groceries off at the food kitchen, or you engage in some relatively meaningless act of philanthropy, and deny where most of your life is going. Look, most of America is really not sitting up at night thinking about investing, and I'm not either, because I don't make that much money.
Can you say that are you proud to be an American?
Am I proud to be an American?
I didn't write these questions, sir. I only read them.
Well, I spent 20 years outside of America. And when you spend that long outside of America, you're not American anymore. The people that I love, and that's why I spoke about Jamal at the beginning, are those people who in every nation, out of every religion, out of every ethnicity, rose up to fight the oppressor on behalf of the oppressed. And they are my brothers, and they are my sisters, and I don't really care what language they speak, and I don't care what color they are, and I don't care what country they come from.
So you certainly touched on this, but I just want to give you one more chance to sort of sum it all up. Since you refer to your own children, how do we give our children hope? Maybe how do you think about giving your children hope?
I don't share the culture's mania for hope. I don't. I find it kind of infantile. I covered war. Many of the people, including my closest friend, were killed in war. A lot of people I lost. You made a very cold calculation of the weapon systems arrayed against you, and you responded as rationally as you could. Hope is embodied. Vasily Grossman got it in his great novel, Life and Fate, which you haven't read, you should go read, where he talks about human kindness, that it's not about a battle between good and evil. It's about a great evil seeking to crush a kernel of human kindness. But if that evil has not crushed human kindness by now, then evil can never win. We have such, I think because I've spent so much time around death, because I've lost so many people and they died young that I worked with, I'm very cognizant of the very brief time that we have on this earth and how fragile it is. Evil will certainly outlive us all, that it is our job to stand up and fight for what is just and what is right and what is good, and believe, as Berrigan said, that good does draw to it the good, the invisible witnesses around us, who I certainly carry. I find hope in that class that I taught on Conquest. My best student, the only one who got an A+, he was convicted of a crime he did not commit when he was 14, and is not eligible to go before a parole board until he is 70 years old. and he's 39 now. The bell goes, you got to move in a prison, or you get a charge. He waits till the classroom is empty, and he says, I know I'm going to die in this prison, but I work as hard as I do because one day I'm going to be a teacher like you. And he walks out. I can live on that for a really long time. That's hope.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for your terrific questions. Please go see Chris Hedges at the table out in the lobby. Pick up a copy of his book. Say hi. He'll sign it for you. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.